And then when it comes to what someone should consider when they're getting into setting their own health and fitness goals, the first place that I would start is identifying what actually matters to you. Like, what are your core values in life? How can you make sure that you're setting any goals that you set in line with those values, and make sure that any process that you try to follow to achieve a goal is in line with those values as well. So an example of that would be if one of your core values is connection, but you try and follow a really restrictive meal plan where you're unable to attend social occasions, you're unable to be present with friends and family, that's going against that value of connection. Probably not going to have a very pleasant experience of the process in the first place, but also you might then end up engaging in some self-sabotaging related behaviors because that goal is not really meaningful to you. It's not in line with your values, and it's not going to make you fulfilled to achieve. So making sure that we're setting any goals that we set in line with what really matters to us in life.
I'm Shreya Parekh, and this is Empower Her, the podcast for women over 35 who want to take control of their health and wealth. Join me and my guests as we share insights, resources, and ideas to help you break free, learn more about yourself, and live your best life while closing the gender gaps. Hit follow to stay connected and sign up for free emails on the Empower Her website to supercharge your journey. With so much information and misinformation about women's health and fitness, it can be overwhelming to figure out what's truly right for you. How do you cut through the noise and find a balanced, sustainable approach that fits your unique needs? Join me today as I sit down with fitness expert Danni Bosworth for an insightful conversation about how women can take a bespoke approach to their health and fitness journey, avoiding extremes in favour of balance and long-term well-being. We'll dive into the concept of functional fitness, discussing how it can be tailored to women at different stages of life. Whether you're just beginning or looking to refine your routine, this discussion will empower you to make informed decisions that work for you. Danni, welcome to the Empower Her podcast. It's great to have you on. I'm super excited to have this conversation because there's some elements of what you do that is quite new to me. So please could you explain a little bit about your journey from what you were doing to what you're doing now? That'll be great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. So I guess there's two sides to my journey, the personal journey through fitness and my journey as a coach. So I'll start on the coaching front. I first got into the fitness industry in 2015 as a gym floor personal trainer, and I worked on the gym floor for 4 years before moving online. And during that time, I ended up getting into competing in bodybuilding. So when I first got into coaching, I was very much just training for health and function, training to feel good, and I coached clients in a very similar way. But then as I got into bodybuilding myself, my own protocols became more and more extreme. And when it comes to bodybuilding, you have to accept that you're sacrificing your health to look a certain way on stage. It is an extreme sport. And I think a lot of people, bodybuilding is quite glamorized on social media. It looks, you've got your hair done, your makeup done on stage, you've got the tan. And if you looked at those pictures on surface level, it can look healthy and it can look very glamorous. But behind the scenes, you do have to sacrifice your health to step on stage. It is an extreme sport, and it does very much become something that consumes your entire life. So I got into bodybuilding, really enjoyed it at the time, but it's not healthy. And I also started coaching some bodybuilding competitors as well during that time. I competed in bodybuilding in the bikini category for 5 years. And then when it came to 2020, I sort of realized that bodybuilding was no longer in line with my values because I really value my health. And if I was to continue to compete in the sport, I would only see more and more negative adaptations from a health perspective as a result of competing in the sport. And the fact that I was pushing people through that process that was detrimental for their health started to sit a bit funny with me. And so I transitioned away from bodybuilding personally and also professionally, stopped coaching competitors as well. So from 2020 to now, essentially my training has become a little bit more functional, and obviously that's something that we spoke about briefly before the podcast. I'm happy to go into, and I am so much healthier than I was when I competed in bodybuilding, and I coach people who want to progress towards their goals but also improve their health and quality of life, rather than sacrificing absolutely everything in pursuit of a goal. And that's very much in line with my values, both personally and professionally. I also have my own podcast called the Female Fitness Podcast, which I set up in 2018. And I love podcasting myself, as well as sometimes being a guest on podcasts and things like that. But yeah, during my time bodybuilding, I also struggled a lot with my hormone health. So I had amenorrhea for a long period of time, and anyone that knows anything about amenorrhea will know that it can be very detrimental, not just for your health in the moment but also your long-term health as well. It's not good for you to spend long periods of time without a period or with irregular periods, and that's usually accompanied by low estrogen, which it was for me. And I'm certainly glad that I took a step back from bodybuilding when I did, so that I could get my health back into a good spot. And yeah, that's a bit about me.
Well, you know what, I feel like you're right with the bodybuilding stuff. It is kind of glamorized, and some people do look at bodybuilders and think, wow, look at their body, look at the way that you must have trained and those kinds of things. But more and more as I've gotten older, certainly I believe in balance. And with the extremities of bodybuilding, why would you say that that's quite an unhealthy approach? And obviously it's not a balanced approach because it is very extreme in how you train. But what kind of health things would you kind of highlight that made it like an unhealthy thing to do?
So first of all, it's very all-consuming. So usually when people participate in bodybuilding, they do become quite isolated. And we know that being social is incredibly beneficial for our health. So we lose that aspect of health. We lose, usually, in most cases. There are some people who compete in bodybuilding who do still maintain a social life, but for most people, they will become quite isolated because it becomes all-consuming. So that's one way in which it can negatively impact our health, when we're not getting that human interaction. We've not got those connections in our lives that we once had. And then on top of that, we have to get down to very low body fat percentages when we compete in bodybuilding in order to step on stage. And that involves spending periods of time in a state of low energy availability. And what that means is that we've not got enough energy coming in to support our energy requirements and then sustain bodily functions. So after the energy expenditure from training, cardio, walking is taken away from the calories coming in, we don't have enough energy left over to sustain bodily functions like our menstrual cycle. And so what happens then is our body sacrifices menstrual cycle function in order to keep us alive. And we see negative repercussions in terms of things like low estrogen as a result of that. So our hormone health is not in a good spot when we don't have regular cycles. So not only are we unable to reproduce, like have babies, but on top of that, it can result in things like a higher injury risk. It can result in feeling cold all the time, issues with going to urinate really frequently throughout the day, poor pelvic floor health. It can result in more serious bone issues like low bone mineral density over the long term, not just in that moment. And then that can, if you think about as you age, if you've got poor bone health earlier on, it puts you at a greater risk of falls that result in you being immobile as a result of that. And that can seriously harm our quality of life and also our life expectancy. And when we have low estrogen, it can also impact our heart health and our digestion as well. So there's a lot of things that tie into this that can occur as a result of amenorrhea, which is the absence of a regular menstrual cycle or irregular cycles. And that is something that a lot of people experience through their time bodybuilding. So it's not great for our health from that perspective. On top of that, it's very common that we experience nutrient deficiencies when we're competing in bodybuilding, because people generally tend to stick to very similar foods every single day because it makes the process of maintaining a calorie deficit easier. But that comes with detrimental effects from a health perspective, because we're not getting as wide of a range of different vitamins and minerals, micro and macronutrients. And usually our fat intake is quite low when we're bodybuilding as well, because fat is quite energy dense. And so limiting our fats, again, makes it easier to sustain a calorie deficit in order to get down to those low levels of body fat. So there's lots of different things that can contribute to our health taking a hit when we're bodybuilding. And those things, I only really touched on the physical there, whereas there's a lot of psychological factors that can come into that as well, such as we see an increase in body image issues and an increase in disordered eating tendencies, and potentially even leading to eating disorders that can come out from as about as a result of bodybuilding as well. And those body image issues, we see an increased risk of those when we're bodybuilding, because we could become so focused on our body composition and preoccupied with it. We're monitoring it so closely, and that is something that actually can have a negative impact on our perception of our own bodies and result in things like body dysmorphia. And on top of that, we tend to attach a sense of self-worth to what we look like, because ultimately in bodybuilding, that's what the process is all about. That's what we get judged on when we step on stage. You get first place if you look a certain way. Yeah. And so that can result in us identifying with our body composition and it becoming something that determines our sense of self-worth. And that can be really detrimental from a body image perspective as well.
Yeah, so lots of repercussions involved with kind of going down the bodybuilding route. So this is my kind of question really, because there's so much information out there and there's so many different approaches to being healthy and fit. And I see a lot on social media, do this and you'll become like this, or you'll look like this. And for me, I feel like that's not really a balanced approach, and it's not really bespoke. So what should women really be looking out for when they want to, when they have a health and fitness goal, whatever that health and fitness goal is for them? Because it's usually, it's very personal. And people have, like you said, people have goals for different reasons. What should they be looking out for? Because I've been down the road where, when you mentioned that thing about going into calorie deficit and sticking to a certain food every single day, I've been down that road and it certainly didn't suit me. And my goal was different to what they were pushing me to do. Yeah. And I went down that route. My kids and my husband, they thought I'd gone mad. They were like, what are you doing? Why are you eating the same thing every day, for the next 3 weeks, and then adjusting your diet to then eat something else for the next 2 weeks and so on? What are the consequences of that? And what should women be really looking out for when they have certain health and fitness goals?
Yeah, so I guess when it comes to eating the same thing every day, what the consequences of that are, it's like I mentioned previously, it means that we have a lot less diversity in our diet, which in itself means we're getting a smaller range of different micro and macronutrients. And so that's going to increase our risk of certain deficiencies alone. But on top of that, it can become something which creates this fear of consuming any foods outside of our norm. So, those same foods that you eat every single day, you might then be a little bit fearful because you always have those same foods and they seem very safe to you. You might then be very fearful of consuming anything outside of that. So say you're given a restricted meal plan, which is like you need to eat, I don't know, eggs for meal 1, chicken, rice and broccoli for meal 2, turkey bolognese for your last meal, or whatever it is. This is just a random example. If you then go out for a meal and there isn't that option on the menu, it might cause someone to feel quite nervous and maybe even a little bit anxious and fearful about what might happen. And that can be very detrimental for our relationship with food and our overall health, because first of all, that, you know, it's not healthy to feel anxious in the run up to social occasions all the time, and it's going to decrease our likelihood of actually attending social occasions and being able to be present during them. But it can also lead to further disordered eating behaviours and this sort of need for control around food, which is okay in some circumstances and is a means to an end. But when it becomes extreme, and we have this constant need for control around food, it can be very detrimental for a lot of reasons, both mentally and physically. And then when it comes to what someone should consider when they're getting into setting their own health and fitness goals, the first place that I would start is identifying what actually matters to you. Like, what are your core values in life? How can you make sure that you're setting any goals that you set in line with those values, and make sure that any process that you try to follow to achieve a goal is in line with those values as well. So an example of that would be if one of your core values is connection, but you try and follow a really restrictive meal plan where you're unable to attend social occasions, you're unable to be present with friends and family, that's going against that value of connection. And so you're probably not going to have a very pleasant experience of the process in the first place, but also you might then end up engaging in some self-sabotage and related behaviors because that goal is not really meaningful to you. It's not in line with your values, and it's not going to make you fulfilled to achieve. So making sure that we're setting any goals that we set in line with what really matters to us in life, and making sure that the process we take to achieving those goals is in line with our values is super important. And that will help us make sure that we're setting the right goals for ourselves, and we're going about achieving those goals in a way that is actually appropriate for us and fits our life and is going to make us happy and healthy, as opposed to being something which is detrimental for us.
I love that. I've never thought of aligning my health and fitness goals to my values, and that really has made me think. I do think about values quite a lot, but I don't tend to associate them with my goals. And you're right, with any goals, whether it's health and fitness or something else, if it doesn't align with your core values, then you're not going to really be happy doing them, I suppose.
Yeah.
Probably end up, not doing them, or doing them for a short period and then kind of it disintegrating. That is definitely something to think about. What in terms of, I know you mentioned functional fitness. Now, this is something I've not heard about. Could you talk a bit about that and how that ties in with health and fitness goals and what you do?
Of course. So I was chatting to Shreya before the podcast, and I guess functional fitness is not something that looks the same for each person, because I did a functional fitness coaching qualification with a company called the PFCA, and something that they say, which I think is a really good way of putting it, is that functional fitness belongs to the individual. So it's not something that, it's not a certain training style that everyone who does functional fitness does. It is suited to the individual's goals and how they want to live their life. It usually involves a mixture of different training styles. So, for example, for most people who want to be their best functioning version of themselves, they will benefit from having some cardiovascular activity in their lives, as well as some resistance training, because we know that those two things are really good for our health and function. And so for most people who take this approach of being a little bit more functional with the training, they will have a mixture of those different training styles. So that's usually pretty much a constant. But the type of exercises an individual does and the type of cardiovascular exercise an individual does will depend still on their individual goals and what they're wanting to achieve. So if, for example, you had a client who was doing a certain fitness competition, they would have to make sure that they're prepared for that fitness competition by replicating certain elements of it. So if, like, they've got a certain lift in there, say it's like a deadlift, they're going to have to put a deadlift into their training and other exercises to support their performance with that exercise. Whereas if someone is just training for life, then their training program is going to take into account enjoyment, so, the exercises that they really get on with and they look forward to, but it's also going to include things that are going to strengthen their joints, tendons and ligaments, and also build strength and resilience on the whole, so that they're able to function well throughout their lives, prevent injuries, improve their quality of life as they age, make sure they're able to function as their best self. So yeah, functional fitness very much belongs to the individual, but it usually involves a mixture of different training styles, moving in different planes of movement, rather than bodybuilding, for example, which everyone does hypertrophy training. Everyone trains to build maximal muscle tissue. That's not really functional fitness, so to speak, because everyone tends to do the same thing. It doesn't really belong to the individual, and it can actually limit our function. It can limit our range of motion. It can make us quite stiff if we just train in like one plane of motion all the time, for example, and with one training style. So that's where functional fitness would be different from, say, bodybuilding, where you're training purely to develop maximal muscle tissue, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So would you say, I guess, a fitness program that a 20-year-old does or a 30 or a 40-year-old does should be quite different? Or are there I guess there are probably maybe common themes, but should the way a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old or 40-year-old woman and over approach to fitness be different? And how would that be?
Slightly, potentially, in terms of, I guess the biggest consideration I would take into account is someone's recovery capability might not be quite as good. If, for example, they're going through the menopause and they have low estrogen, their hormones aren't in quite as good of a spot. They're more lethargic. Maybe they've got kids as well, so they've got additional commitments, more stress. Someone who has that additional stress, potentially impaired hormone health, is like going through the menopause, has a lot on their plate. Their recovery capabilities are not going to be as great as someone in their 20s who doesn't have all of these additional considerations and commitments. So the main thing I would take into account is that, and recognize that you've got to work with yourself and meet yourself where you're at. So if you have a lot of this extra stress, your training frequency and overall volume might be a little bit lower, but you can still train hard, and the same principles are going to apply as to someone who's in their 20s. So you're still going to benefit from resistance training, lifting weights. You're still going to benefit from training hard. You're still going to benefit from having some cardiovascular activity in your program. And so all of those basics and fundamentals, those principles stay the same. But what the training program looks like on paper in terms of the volume and the training frequency and maybe intensity, that is what might change.
Mm-hmm. And with nutrition then, because I know you're a nutritionist as well, which is great. How does that fit in? Do you think it's more important than the training, or is training more important? Because I know some people say nutrition is more important. Getting your nutrition right is more important than exercising, or exercising is, obviously I'm not saying exercising is more important than your nutrition. Of course, nutrition is important, but is there a kind of, I don't know, like a 50-50, or is it 80-20? Because I've heard all the figures from all sorts of places.
Do you know what? It depends on the individual's goal, which is most important.
Okay.
But in an ideal world, we would have both of those two things working together rather than just focusing on one, because without adequate nutrition, we're not going to be able to perform to our true potential anyway, mentally or physically. And without training, we're not going to get those health benefits in terms of making our bodies more resilient, making us strong, feeling good in ourselves. There's huge, not just physical, but psychological benefits to training. So the two very much go hand in hand. And ideally, we want to look at both of those things rather than seeing them as two separate entities. We want to recognize that these two things support each other. They work together. and we want like a world in which we can address both of them. And that doesn't mean that you have to be super rigid and like grind harder and all of that. It's just looking at your life and thinking, okay, how can I fit training into this? How can I fit regular exercise into this realistically? It's not about going from not training at all to training 5-6 times a week. It's like, okay, can I just start by adding a little bit of movement into my day? Can I then layer a bit of resistance training in there in my week somewhere? It doesn't have to be all or nothing. And the same with nutrition. It's not about weighing all your food out to the gram, tracking your calories, all of that. Can you just make small adjustments to support your performance, to support your health, to make sure that you're nourishing your body and nourishing your mind? So yeah, I ideally address both at the same time, but that doesn't mean you have to go from 0 to 100 real quick with it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it just sounds to me more and more I hear, it's a bespoke approach. There is not, one thing that works well with everyone. And I feel like a lot of women and men, we watch people on social media, on other media formats, and we just think that one thing's going to work for us. And I'm really trying to want to get the message across, it's so important, whatever your goals are, that you find someone that you can resonate with and really go for something that works for you and not everyone else. Now, I am going to contradict that slightly and ask you for a kind of a bit of a generic approach, I guess. Now, how can a woman that is super busy, everyone's going on this busy thing at the moment, right? Where we're juggling careers, family, caring responsibilities, whether that's kids or with elderly. And a lot of people do not have time to address their health and fitness. And it gets to a point where, they've become very ill, whether that's stress related or, physical, mental. All these illnesses come about somehow at some stage in their life because they haven't stopped to think about their health. Now, what can someone that is juggling a lot, and a lot of women tend to be juggling a lot, what can they do to really start thinking about their health and fitness goals, and how can they start implementing that?
Yeah. Now, the first thing I would say is you need to recognize that unless you look after yourself, you're not going to be able to spin all of these plates to the best of your ability. You're not going to be able to show up within your work or within your personal life as the best version of you. And so a lot of women tend to care about the people in their lives, whether that be within work or whether it be within your personal life and your family. But recognizing that, first of all, you deserve to show up for yourself. You need to learn to look after you and recognize that you deserve that, and you deserve to be selfish and get comfortable with being a little bit selfish at times. And then second of all, on top of that, it's not purely selfish to look after yourself. You're not serving the best version. You're not serving those in your life, your family, your friends, your loved ones, the people that you work with, to the best of your ability if you're neglecting yourself. You're not capable. So recognizing that can be really powerful and can give people a bit of a perspective change to help them make the time that they need to show up for themselves and look after themselves and improve their health. Now, when it comes to taking the action, the first thing I would do is recognize ways in which you can improve your health that actually don't take any more time. So little things like, you can get frozen veg, you can get frozen fruit. It doesn't have to be the fresh stuff. You don't have to spend hours cooking to have a really nutrient dense meal. You could, for example, something that I do is I have different bags of different salad leaves. So I might have rocket, spinach, beetroot salad, sweet and crunchy salad, whatever it is, and mix them together to make salad for lunch, so that it takes zero prep time. I'm not cooking anything.
Yeah.
But I've got a wide range of different, we've got dark leafy greens in there. I've got lots of different colours because of the different bags of salad in a meal. Obviously, I have protein and fats and stuff with that as well, but it's a diverse meal without it taking any additional preparation time. And thinking about doing things like, can you prepare meals in advance so that you don't have to spend time cooking, but you can still have a really nutrient dense meal? Can you have a mixed jar of nuts and seeds in your cupboard that you can add to porridge or yogurt? Things that don't take any additional time. Start there, do those things, and then build on that, rather than going straight in with, I need to train for an hour a day, or I need to start cooking these really complex recipes to be the healthiest that they possibly can. You don't need to start there. And then little things like, can you just take 5 minutes to yourself each day to take a few deep breaths and have a bit of a mindful moment, or engage in some journaling? Can you make sure that you're waking up and going to bed at a pretty similar time each day? Can you just get a bit of daylight in that first half of the day? Start with the simple stuff and then build on that, rather than going from one extreme to the other.
Yeah, it sounds like, with extremes, I know we're talking about, extreme bodybuilding, and generally doing something in extreme isn't the right approach and shouldn't really be the right approach. And starting with small things and building on that is definitely something that women should consider. I know a lot of women, they just do not have the time. I mean, sometimes that's me as well, and I forget, or I just think, oh, I'll just do it tomorrow now, because I just can't. I haven't got the capacity. In terms of what you do, what is your approach to, when someone comes to you and says, help me, where would you start them?
The first thing I always do is I get someone on a call and just chat to them and let them talk to me about where they're at and what they're wanting to achieve and what they're struggling with. And then we'll address that. Rather than taking a one size fits all with everyone, I will get them on a call and talk to them, let them talk to me, let them ask questions, and meet them where they're at. I'll also take them through an exercise where we go through their core values so that I can make sure any goals we set are in line with them. I'll ask them how many times they're able to commit to training so that we can program in line with that, rather than just throwing a training program at them. And we'll work on, I'll get them to send me over a typical day's worth of eating. So what does your eating patterns look like at the moment? And then we'll make small tweaks to that. I'll give them some habit-based targets to help them support their health a little bit better, again, without it being time consuming. So it's all about meeting the individual where they're at. Generally, their programming will involve some form of resistance training, some form of cardiovascular exercise. The most important thing is that they can be consistent with whatever I've set them. So it's important that I set that in line with their availability, rather than it being like, okay, I'm just going to throw a random training program at you.
Yeah.
And we'll just work on addressing anything they're struggling with. So for example, if someone's struggling with their body image, I will give them some work to do to help them improve that. There's no sort of one size fits all with everything. I always work with the individual in front of me.
That's great. Well, all your details are going to be in the show notes anyway. So if anyone wants to reach out, please have a look at the show notes. But Danni, it's been great to have you on. Thank you so much for being on the Empower podcast.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to Empower Her. I hope today's episode has left you feeling inspired and motivated to make a positive difference in your world. Please follow the podcast and share it with anyone who will find it helpful. Until next time, keep striving for positive change and greatness for all women.